For centuries, the Vatican has seen popes rise and fall, pontiffs crowned in glory, others buried in shame, power, politics, prayers, all wrapped in red robes and marble silence. But what happened this morning was different. It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't even public. It was a revelation. You weren't supposed to see this. None of us were. But something sacred slipped through the cracks of silence, something no camera was allowed to capture. Yet somehow you're about to witness it. You're about to feel it. Because this was not just another Vatican meeting. No, this was an awakening. He didn't come to teach. He came to restore. He didn't come to assert power. He came to kneel, and what he said to his brothers broke centuries of silence and brought every one of them to their knees. Let me ask you something the church doesn't like to ask out loud. What if the brotherhood of bishops was never supposed to be political? What if apostolic succession was never meant to be institutional, but spiritual? What if the real lineage of Christ's shepherds was marked not by rings and robes, but by scars, by humility, by truth? What if this morning they remembered who they really are, not rulers, not managers, but brothers, chosen, burning, burdened with the truth? And now the world must ask, what did Pope Leo XIV say to them that made grown men weep? What did he uncover that made the ancient stones of Rome tremble? And most of all, what if this moment wasn't just history, but prophecy unfolding? Keep watching. Ensure to like and hit the subscribe button. Feel free to tell us where you're watching from. You're about to see what they never wanted the world to hear, and once you do, you'll never look at the church the same way again. Not ever. He summoned them. Not for politics, not for liturgy, not for the posturing of ecclesiastical power that has so often turned sacred garments into royal costumes. No, he called them for truth. A hidden truth. The kind that doesn't echo through microphones or make headlines in the Catholic Herald. A truth too heavy for paper, too dangerous for press releases. He spoke not as a ruler, not as a theologian, but as a brother among brothers, remembering something ancient, something almost forgotten. And they came. Some limped in after years of silence. Some wore robes eaten by moths, not touched by applause. Some had not spoken to each other in decades, divided by language, liturgy, and jurisdiction. But still, they came, because the voice that called them was not his alone. It was older, deeper, woven into the marrow of the church itself. One of the early fathers wrote, "There is a unity among shepherds older than Rome itself, older than mitres, older than Latin, older than the split between East and West. It's not the kind of unity forged by documents, but by fire." And it was that fire Pope Leo XIV called back to life. You see, long before the papacy became a throne, it was a watchtower. And long before bishops became administrators, they were guardians of mysteries. You won't hear this in most seminaries today, but in the earliest councils, before Nicaea, before Chalcedon, there were whispers, letters exchanged in secret, warnings sent between the faithful. The letters of Ignatius, yes, the same Ignatius of Antioch, contain fragments they don't teach anymore, because they raise questions, dangerous questions. He wrote, in one suppressed fragment, "Guard the breath between brothers, for when they forget each other, the flame dies." What flame? What breath? Why were such words hidden? Some say it's allegory, some say forgery, but some believe it speaks of a sacred bond, not of title, but of spirit, a bond rekindled today. Because what happened this morning didn't just stir bishops, it woke up ghosts. The doors of the Sistine Chapel were sealed. No recordings, no aids, no papal guards allowed beyond the veil. Only the brothers, only the scroll, only silence. What happened inside was never meant to leave. And yet, it did. Not through leaks, not through reporters, but through presence. You can feel it right now, can't you? Something has shifted. You're not watching a documentary. You're being invited into a moment that rippled through marble halls and shook the spine of an ancient church. The moment the shepherds remembered that before they wore gold, they walked barefoot. That before they signed decrees, they wept over bread and wine. That before they built cities, they broke themselves for others. Pope Leo XIV didn't reveal a new doctrine. He whispered an old one, older than Rome, older than Peter, older than the keys and the crown. And now, it's your turn to hear it, to carry it, to remember it. Because what they heard in that room wasn't just for them, it was for you. And if your heart is still enough, quiet enough, you might just hear it too. You've seen conclaves before. You've seen cardinals in crimson robes filing into ornate chapels, whispering Latin beneath golden ceilings. But this was not that. This wasn't official. This wasn't televised. This wasn't even acknowledged. Because the men who arrived that morning weren't all cardinals. Some were. Most weren't. Some had no rank, no title, no public voice. But they were called. From mountains, deserts, ruins. From the edges of Christendom. From monasteries so remote they don't appear on maps. From churches that still use languages the modern world has forgotten. A few were from cities, yes, but they moved like shadows. One came from a hidden chapel beneath Cairo, another from an underground church in China. There was a man whose name was removed from all Vatican records 10 years ago, and there he was, kneeling before Pope Leo, weeping like a child. You won't find their names in any press release, you won't find photos, you won't find documentation. But they were there. They were chosen, and they knew why they were summoned. You see, Pope Leo didn't send invitations. He didn't send emails. He didn't make announcements. He simply lit the flame of an ancient candle in the Pope's private chapel, the Crux Lucis, a sacred rite not seen since the 14th century. A flame that, according to legend, signals the calling of the hidden brotherhood. And across the earth, they felt it. Some say they heard a whisper in their dreams. Others say they saw a dove land at their window 3 nights in a row. One man claims he woke up with the smell of incense on his pillow and a scroll beside his bed containing only one line. Come to the house of brothers, for the hour of remembering is near. Now you tell me, coincidence? Superstition? Or something far deeper? These weren't political allies. Many of them had disagreed publicly. Some had even excommunicated each other over the decades. But when they stepped into that chamber, there were no factions, no debates, no egos, only silence and unity. The kind that doesn't come from consensus but from calling, and that's what makes this so important, so terrifying, and so beautiful. Because for the first time in modern history, something ancient moved beneath the surface of the church. Something unplanned, uncontrollable, unfiltered by bureaucracy. And at the center of it all was a scroll, wrapped in linen, carried not by guards, but by Pope Leo himself. He walked into the room not with pomp, but with bare feet. And in that moment, the church changed. Quietly, permanently. What was in that scroll? What did those men hear? Why did their hands tremble when it was read? Stay with me, because in the next moment, we open the scroll. And what you hear may not just change what you believe about the church. It may change what you believe about your place in it. It was wrapped in white linen, tied with a single red cord. No Vatican seal, no markings of authority. Just cloth, simple, silent. But what was inside spoke louder than any papal decree. Pope Leo XIV carried it with both hands, like a relic, like a newborn. He didn't speak when he entered the chamber. He didn't sit on the throne. He walked to the altar, placed the scroll gently at the center, and stepped back. The bishops stood in silence, some trembling, some pale, because they recognized the linen. They'd heard rumors, whispers, passed quietly among monastics and mystics. This wasn't just any scroll. This was the forgotten witness, a document believed lost for over a millennium, a text rumored to predate the Council of Nicaea. Some say it was written by a disciple of John the Beloved. Others say it came from the early Syrian desert fathers, men who never sought Rome's approval, but who walked with the Holy Spirit in ways that frightened the institutional church. What was written inside? Not dogma, not rules, but memory, spiritual memory. You see, this scroll didn't contain new revelation. It contained something older than most of us are ready to accept. A theology before theology. Words like echoes of Eden. One passage read aloud by Pope Leo shook the room like thunder. The shepherd shall know his kin, not by robes nor title, but by the tear that falls when truth is spoken. They say one of the bishops gasped when he heard it, then collapsed into his seat, because he'd heard that phrase before, in a dream, 30 years ago. Another line said, "There shall come a time when the throne of Peter will bow to the fire of brotherhood, and the true shepherds will be seen not in palaces, but in places forgotten." Do you see what this means? This scroll didn't just contain theology, it contained prophecy. A prophecy not about the end of the world, but about the beginning of something the world forgot. And that's why it was hidden, because it undermines the very structure that so many have used to control faith. It replaces hierarchy with humility. It replaces lineage with listening. It replaces titles with tears. Some scholars even today call the scroll a forgery, convenient, safe. But ask yourself this: why would something forged cause such trembling among men of faith? Why would something fabricated bring a dozen bishops to tears? Why would grown men, some of whom once ruled dioceses the size of nations, fall to their knees in a moment of unexplainable conviction? Because truth has a weight that cannot be faked. And when Pope Leo read that scroll aloud, they didn't just hear words, they heard memory. Memory that their souls recognized, even if their minds couldn't explain it. One final line echoed in the chamber, read so slowly, so tenderly, it felt like a father whispering to his lost sons. "When the brothers gather without fear, the Spirit shall breathe again, not in wind, but in whisper. And the flame shall rise unseen, but unstoppable." Now tell me, was this a theological stunt, a symbolic gesture? Or was this something far greater? Was this the church remembering its heart? And if so, why now? Why this pope? Why these men? Why you, watching this video, hearing words that were never meant to leave those walls? Unless you were meant to carry them. Because this isn't just church history. This is living prophecy. And it's only just begun. You've heard of Adam, the first man, the one from the garden, the one formed from dust. But have you ever asked, which Adam? Because Scripture tells a story, but not always in a straight line. And if you've ever felt like something's missing, like there's a deeper layer beneath the words, it's because there is. And Pope Leo XIV, he went there. That morning, he didn't just read the scroll. He unpacked something buried under centuries of translation, debate, and doctrine. He spoke softly, but what he said cracked through time. He said, "There is not one Adam, there are two, one who bore the image, and one who bore the burden." At first, some bishops looked confused, others looked afraid, because they knew what he meant. You see, in Genesis 1, God says, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And he creates them, male and female, together. But in Genesis 2, there's a different creation. A man formed from the ground, alone, and then woman, from his rib. Two stories, two timelines, two Adams? Some rabbis have long held this mystery quietly, tucked away in midrash and commentary. They speak of the first Adam, created in glory, light, and spirit, and the second Adam, formed in flesh, bounded by time, destined for suffering. Pope Leo whispered this ancient insight to his brothers. The first Adam bore the fire of divine likeness. The second was clothed in skin to carry the weight of mercy. Now, let that settle in you. Could it be that Adam wasn't just a man, but an idea, an office, a divine pattern repeated again and again across human history? Some theologians call this the Adamic cycle, where God raises a man to carry a covenant, knowing he will fall so that grace may rise. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, all bearing fragments of the first flame, all failing, all pointing forward to one who would not. Christ, the final Adam. But Pope Leo took it even further. He said the church had spent centuries obsessed with chronology and missed symbolism. We were trying to locate Eden on a map, instead of realizing it might be a mirror. What if Eden wasn't a place? What if it was a position? A state of being where man walked with God until he fell into time. Then, who was the Adam of Genesis 2? Pope Leo leaned into the flame and said, he was not the first human. He was the first priest. Now that changes everything. That Adam wasn't chosen because he was the beginning. He was chosen because he was willing to walk barefoot before God, to tend the garden, to name what was sacred, to fall, and still listen. A prototype of what every priest was meant to be. Not a ruler, not a judge, a wounded intercessor. And if that's true, then what happened in the Vatican that morning wasn't just symbolic. It was sacramental. A return, a remembering. A moment when the modern priesthood was invited to lay down its prestige and pick up its purpose. Pope Leo wasn't challenging doctrine. He was calling his brothers back to their identity. You are not CEOs, he said. You are Adams, keepers of gardens you did not plant, guardians of mysteries you cannot control. And you? Yes, you watching this. If you've ever felt like the church forgot her soul, if you've ever wept because something inside your spirit knows we traded intimacy for institution, then this moment wasn't just for them. It was for you. Because if the Adam of Eden was never the first, but simply the next, then maybe you're next too. Maybe the garden is closer than you think. When he finished reading the scroll, Pope Leo didn't look at them. He looked at the cross, and for a moment, just a breath, it felt as if time paused, like the walls of the Vatican were thinner than usual, as if the church was no longer in Rome, but standing at the edge of something much older, much deeper. He stepped forward, lifted his eyes, and finally spoke. Brothers, we were never called to defend walls. We were called to open gates. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't teaching. He was revealing. And what he said next silenced even the most skeptical bishop in the room. Adam was not the first man. He was the first priest. He was placed in Eden not to rule, but to offer. The garden was not a kingdom. It was an altar. For centuries, the priesthood has been modeled after Moses, after Aaron, after Levi. But Pope Leo, he looked back further, beyond the tabernacle, beyond Sinai, back to Eden, back to Adam. He said, God's first altar was not built with stone, it was soil, and his first priest was not clothed in linen, but in light. And what if that light never truly left? What if every true priest, every true bishop carries a spark of it? A hidden fire, waiting to be stirred, not by status, but by surrender. He opened a small book bound in black leather, not a Bible, not a catechism, but a handwritten journal, pages worn by time and tears. A book passed down in secret from one silent pope to another. It's said to have originated with Pope Celestine III, the pope who abdicated in the 13th century and was later condemned to silence. In it were reflections, prayers, dreams, and one haunting entry. The church will one day forget her priesthood. When she becomes a palace and not a garden, the flame will hide, but one shall rise, white in name, black in burden, to awaken her sons. Pope Leo closed the book and simply said, "The flame must be found again." He wasn't asking for reform. He was sounding a call for remembrance, for renewal, for resurrection. He said the church has been busy managing survival, but has forgotten the divine experiment. The experiment where God made humans capable of choice, of communion, of carrying him not in temples but in breath. He said, "We were never called to maintain the structure. We were called to risk it, to lose it even, if it meant bearing the truth." Then he stepped down from the altar, removed his papal ring, and placed it, not in anyone's hand, but on the scroll, as if to say, "This is my authority now, not in power, but in witness." And there was one final gesture. He walked barefoot to each brother, and without words, he kissed their feet, one by one, Eastern patriarchs, desert monks, silenced bishops, men who had once been rivals, now weeping like sons, because in that moment, they were not authorities, they were not theologians, they were brothers. And for the first time in a long time, they remembered, not who the church told them to be, but who God called them to be. And you, if you're still here, still listening, then maybe, just maybe, the flame hasn't gone out in you either, because this wasn't just a moment for them. This was a moment for every soul who has ever longed for the sacred to feel real again. And maybe that's the hidden plan. Not to build bigger churches, not to win more debates, but to restore what was always God's first desire, a garden of priests, a world of intercessors, a church, not made of stone, but of those who walk barefoot, carrying sacred fire in cracked vessels. You've heard a lot, but more than that, you've felt something, haven't you? Not just curiosity, not just interest, but a weight in your chest, a stirring in your spirit, a memory that doesn't belong to your mind, but to your soul. Because somewhere deep inside you, you already knew. You already knew the church was more than bricks and incense. You already knew the priesthood was more than pulpits and protocol. You already knew that the moment Pope Leo XIV stepped barefoot into that chamber, something ancient, something buried, rose again. The truth is, it's never been about robes. It's never been about who sits on the chair. It's always been about who carries the flame of sacrifice, the flame of brotherhood, the flame of truth. And today, that flame has found you. So now I must ask you, not as a narrator, but as a fellow seeker, what will you do with this moment? Will you close the video and go back to the noise? Or will you pause and feel the weight of what's just entered your life? Because this wasn't entertainment. This wasn't opinion. This was invitation. An invitation to wake up, to remember, to carry something the world doesn't understand, but desperately needs. A priesthood of tears instead of titles, a church that breathes rather than controls, a faith that walks barefoot into mystery. So I ask you now, do you believe what happened behind those sealed Vatican doors was symbolic? Or was it supernatural? Was it ritual? Or was it remnant? Was it politics or prophecy? Drop your answer in the comments, not because I need to read it, but because you need to say it. And if you found something real in this message, if your soul is burning quietly with the scent of Eden, then join us. Subscribe to this channel, Pope Leo XIV Truth, not because we want followers, but because the truth is gathering its witnesses. We don't follow trends here, we follow fire. And when the world asks why you're still watching videos about scrolls, about barefoot popes, about silent priests and ancient dreams, you can tell them, truth is not popular, but it is eternal.